The crack of gunfire shattered the morning stillness as Tessa Daniels ducked behind the wooden water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The Double D Ranch, her father's legacy and now her burden, was under attack for the third time this month. And this time, the Outlaws weren't just after the cattle. "Miss Daniels!" a gruff voice called out. "We know you're out there. The boss wants a word with you about that land deed." Tessa gripped her father's old Winchester rifle tighter, her knuckles white with strain. At 24, she'd been running the ranch alone since her father's passing 2 winters ago. The neighboring ranchers had given her 6 months before she'd sell. She'd lasted 2 years, but now the Blackwell Gang was making it impossible to hold on. Another bullet splintered the barn door beside her, sending wooden shards flying. Tessa squeezed her eyes shut, trying to steady her breathing. Her 100 head of cattle represented everything: her future, her independence, her home. And now, these men wanted to take it all. "Come on out, Miss Daniels," the voice called again. "Nobody needs to get hurt today." That's when she heard it, the thundering of hooves approaching from the east, not from the direction of the Outlaws. Tessa risked a glance over the edge of the trough and spotted a lone rider cresting the hill, silhouetted against the rising sun, pushing his horse hard. The Outlaws heard it too. 3 men scrambled for cover, while 2 others moved toward their horses. The lead man, Tessa recognized him as Jed Harris, the Blackwell Gang's second in command, raised his revolver toward the approaching rider. The stranger didn't slow. If anything, he urged his horse faster, a magnificent chestnut stallion that ate up the ground with powerful strides. As he drew closer, Tessa could make out a tall man with broad shoulders, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, a bandana pulled up to his eyes. Harris fired, the bullet kicking up dirt near the rider's horse, but the stranger didn't flinch. In one fluid motion, he drew his revolver and returned fire, striking Harris in the shoulder. The outlaw dropped his weapon with a howl of pain. The stranger dismounted in a leap, his boots hitting the ground as he rolled behind a stack of hay bales. 2 more shots from his Colt dropped another outlaw clutching his leg. "You boys picked the wrong ranch," the stranger called out, his voice deep and steady. "I suggest you clear out while you still can. This ain't your fight." "Mister," one of the outlaws shouted back. "It is now," the stranger replied. Then, with a confidence that made Tessa's breath catch, he added, "You came for the cattle and her. Well, let me tell you something you'll leave empty-handed." The remaining outlaws exchanged glances, then helped their wounded comrades onto their horses. Harris, blood staining his shirt, glared toward the hay bales. "This ain't over. When Blackwell hears about this, tell Blackwell he can come see me personally," the stranger interrupted. "Name's Quinn Zachary. He'll know who I am." The name rippled through the outlaws like a shock wave. Tessa watched their faces pale as they retreated, spurring their horses into a gallop away from the ranch. When the dust settled, Quinn Zachary rose from behind the hay bales, holstering his revolver. He pulled down his bandana, revealing a strong jaw with a day's growth of beard. His eyes, the color of a summer sky, found Tessa immediately. "Miss Daniels, I presume?" he asked, approaching slowly, hands visible. Tessa kept her rifle trained on him. "That's right. And you've just made enemies of the Blackwell Gang on my behalf, Mr. Zachary. Why would you do that?" A smile touched the corners of his mouth as he stopped a respectful distance away. "Let's just say I've got my own score to settle with Blackwell. Been tracking his gang for weeks." He glanced around at the ranch. "Looks like you could use a hand around here." "I don't need charity," Tessa replied sharply, though she couldn't deny the ranch was suffering. Fences needed mending, cattle needed branding, and now she had the Blackwell Gang to worry about. Quinn nodded, respecting her pride. "Not offering charity, madam, offering fair trade. I need a place to stay while I deal with Blackwell. You need protection and an extra set of hands." He gestured to the bullet holes peppering the barn. "Seems like a reasonable arrangement to me." Tessa finally lowered her rifle, studying the stranger. There was something in his eyes, a darkness, yes, but also a steadiness that spoke of honor. "1 week," she said finally. "You can stay 1 week, but if you bring trouble to my door—" "Madam," Quinn interrupted with a tip of his hat, "trouble's already at your door. I'm just evening the odds." As he turned to retrieve his horse, Tessa couldn't help but wonder what storm she had just invited onto her land, and whether Quinn Zachary would prove to be her salvation or her downfall. The first light of dawn found Tessa already at work in the barn, fork in hand, as she spread fresh hay for the horses. Sleep had been elusive, her mind churning with thoughts of the attack and the mysterious stranger now sleeping in her father's old cabin, 50 yards from the main house. "You always start this early?" Quinn's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the pink-streaked sky. Tessa straightened, pushing a loose strand of copper hair behind her ear. "Ranch doesn't run itself, Mr. Zachary." "Quinn," he corrected, stepping into the barn and picking up another pitchfork. "And I'm no stranger to ranch work." His sleeves were rolled up, revealing muscled forearms marked with old scars. As he worked alongside her, Tessa noticed the efficient way he moved, no wasted motion, no showing off. This was a man who knew hard work. "You said you've been tracking the Blackwell Gang," Tessa ventured as they moved on to feeding the horses. "Why?" Quinn's rhythm faltered for just a moment. "They took something from me." "And you plan to get it back?" His eyes met hers, hard as flint. "Some things can't be returned, Miss Daniels." "Tessa," she corrected automatically. "Tessa," he repeated, her name sounding different in his voice. They worked in silence for a while before Quinn spoke again. "Your father was Daniel Daniels?" A reluctant smile tugged at Tessa's lips. "His parents had a peculiar sense of humor. Everyone called him Double D, hence the ranch name. I heard stories about him when I passed through Sweetwater. Good man, by all accounts." "The best," Tessa agreed, a familiar ache squeezing her heart. "Built this place from nothing after the war. Everyone said I should sell after he died, that a woman couldn't run a cattle ranch alone." She jabbed her pitchfork into the hay with extra force. "I aim to prove them wrong." Quinn studied her for a long moment. "Seems to me you've been doing just that." By mid-morning, they rode out together to check the herd. The cattle grazed peacefully in the western pasture, a sight that always calmed Tessa's spirit. Her father had taught her to love this land, the rolling hills covered in buffalo grass, the distant mountains sharp against the sky, the meandering creek that never ran dry even in the worst drought. "Beautiful country," Quinn observed as they surveyed the herd from atop a small rise. "Worth fighting for," Tessa replied. Quinn's expression darkened. "Blackwell doesn't want your cattle, Tessa. He wants your land." "Why? There are larger spreads with better water rights." "Location. Your ranch sits between his territory and the new railroad spur they are building in Sweetwater. Control your land, and he controls access." Tessa's stomach tightened. "How do you know all this?" Quinn adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the sun. "Been hunting him long enough to know how he thinks." He turned to face her fully. "The attack yesterday was a warning. Next time, he'll come in force." "Then what do you suggest?" Tessa challenged. "I won't be bullied off my land." A smile touched Quinn's lips, genuine admiration in his eyes. "We prepare, and we reach out to neighbors. Blackwell's made enemies of most folks around here. Time they stood together." "The neighboring ranchers barely acknowledge me," Tessa said bitterly. "They're waiting for me to fail so they can divide up my land." "Maybe, or maybe they just need someone to rally them." Quinn's gaze swept across the landscape. "There's another option, too." "Which is?" "The law. Marshall in Sweetwater's an honest man, from what I've heard." Tessa shook her head. "Marshall Jenkins is 70 years old and hasn't left town in 3 years. Besides, we're too far out for law to be much help." Quinn nodded, accepting her assessment. "Then we do this ourselves." He pointed toward a break in the fence line. "Starting with reinforcing your defenses." They spent the day mending fences both literally and figuratively. Quinn was skilled with tools and seemed to have an instinct for what needed fixing around the ranch. By sundown, Tessa found herself watching him with growing curiosity. He moved with the confidence of a man used to solving problems, yet there was a wariness about him too, the way he always kept his back to a wall, how his hand never strayed far from his holster. That evening, as they sat on the porch eating the stew Tessa had prepared, she finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "What were you before all this, Quinn? Before you started hunting Blackwell?" Quinn set down his bowl, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Does it matter?" "It might, if I'm trusting you with my life and my ranch." He was quiet for so long that Tessa thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I was a lawman, U.S. Marshal out of Denver Territory." The revelation surprised her. "And now? Now I'm just a man with a purpose." He met her gaze directly. "I don't carry a badge anymore, Tessa. But I still believe in justice." "What happened?" Quinn's jaw tightened. "Blackwell happened. His gang hit a settlement called Willow Creek last year. Small place, mostly farmers and a few miners. They were after gold from a recent strike." His voice grew harder. "They didn't just rob the place, they burned it to the ground." "That's terrible," Tessa said softly. "But why would that make you leave the Marshals?" "Because my sister lived there with her husband and son." The words fell between them like stones. "By the time I got word and reached Willow Creek, there was nothing left. Blackwell's men killed anyone who resisted." Understanding dawned on Tessa. "Your family?" Quinn nodded once, his eyes distant with memory. "Sarah was my only kin. Her boy was just 5 years old." His hand tightened around his cup. "I tracked the gang for 3 months official-like. Then my superior ordered me to a different case, said I was too personally involved." "So you resigned?" "Handed in my badge that same day." Quinn's gaze returned to her, intense and unyielding. "I've been hunting Blackwell ever since. 10 months now." Tessa absorbed his story, understanding now the darkness she'd glimpsed in him. "I'm sorry about your family, Quinn." "I'm sorry about your father," he replied simply. They sat in companionable silence as night settled fully around them, the chorus of crickets filling the air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its lonely howl echoing across the plains. "You should know," Quinn said finally, "that when Blackwell learns I'm here, he'll come harder and faster than before." Tessa met his gaze steadily. "Then we'll just have to be ready for him." The days fell into a rhythm as Quinn and Tessa worked side by side to prepare the ranch for the inevitable confrontation. They reinforced the barn, stockpiled ammunition, and Quinn taught Tessa to shoot with deadly accuracy. "You're a natural," he commented as she hit a tin can at 50 paces. Tessa lowered her father's revolver, a sense of accomplishment warming her chest. "My father taught me the basics, but we never practiced much." "Your stance is good, but you're anticipating the recoil." Quinn stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring behind her. "May I?" Tessa nodded, and he positioned himself behind her, his arms coming around to adjust her grip. His chest was warm against her back, his breath stirring the loose strands of hair at her neck. "Breathe in," he instructed, his voice low near her ear. "Then slowly squeeze as you exhale. Don't pull, squeeze." Tessa tried to focus on his words rather than the nearness of him, the clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded her. She followed his instructions, and the can flew off the fence post with her next shot. "See? Perfect." There was a smile in Quinn's voice as he stepped back, and Tessa found she missed his warmth immediately. "Let's try moving targets," she suggested, eager to distract herself from the flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with marksmanship. Over the following days, Quinn accompanied Tessa into Sweetwater for supplies, his presence drawing curious stares from the townspeople. Tessa was used to their looks. A woman rancher was oddity enough, but Quinn's imposing figure beside her created a new wave of whispers. At the general store, Mr. Hopkins greeted them with his usual politeness, though his eyes lingered on Quinn with obvious curiosity. "Your usual order, Miss Daniels?" he asked, already pulling sacks of flour and coffee from the shelves. "Yes, Mr. Hopkins, and we'll need extra ammunition." Tessa placed a list on the counter. "Rifle and revolver." Hopkins' eyebrows rose. "Trouble out your way?" "Just being cautious," Tessa replied lightly. Quinn was examining a display of knives when the store's bell jingled and 3 men entered. Tessa recognized them immediately, hands from the Circle B ranch, owned by Victor Brigham, one of her nearest neighbors. The lead cowboy, a surly man named Garth, spotted her and sneered. "Well, if it ain't the little lady rancher, still hanging on, are you?" Tessa straightened her spine. "Good afternoon, Garth. Please give Mr. Brigham my regards." Garth's gaze shifted to Quinn, hostility evident. "Got yourself a new hired hand? Or something more personal?" The suggestion in his tone made Tessa's cheeks burn. Before she could respond, Quinn turned from the display, his movement casual but somehow threatening. "Friend of yours, Tessa?" he asked, his voice mild, though his eyes were anything but. "These men work for Victor Brigham," Tessa explained, keeping her voice even. "The Circle B borders my property to the north." "Ah." Quinn stepped forward, extending his hand to Garth. "Quinn Zachary, pleasure." Garth looked at the offered hand suspiciously before reluctantly shaking it. He winced as Quinn's grip tightened imperceptibly. "Zachary?" one of the other cowboys muttered. "I heard that name somewhere." "You boys heard about the Blackwell Gang causing trouble in these parts?" Quinn asked conversationally, releasing Garth's hand. The three exchanged glances. "What's it to you?" Garth demanded. "Just wondering if your boss is concerned. Seems to me cattle rustlers and land grabbers are bad for all honest ranchers." Garth scoffed. "Brigham can handle his own problems, unlike some who need to hire guns." His gaze slid dismissively over Tessa. "Interesting perspective," Quinn replied, his smile never reaching his eyes. "You might mention to Mr. Brigham that I'd like to speak with him about mutual interests." "I ain't your messenger boy," Garth spat. Quinn stepped closer, his voice dropping to a murmur that somehow carried to Tessa's ears. "No, you're just a man making a very poor decision right now. Take my message to Brigham, or we'll have a different kind of conversation." Something in Quinn's tone must have registered, because Garth's face paled slightly. He backed up a step. "Whatever, I'll tell him." As the cowboys left, Hopkins let out a low whistle. "Never seen Garth back down before. You've made quite an impression, Mr. Zachary." Quinn merely shrugged, returning to Tessa's side. "Just having a friendly chat." On their way out of town, loaded with supplies, Tessa finally asked, "What was that about? Wanting to speak with Brigham?" Quinn secured a sack of grain in the wagon before answering. "Blackwell isn't just after your land, Tessa. Your ranch is just the beginning. If he gets a foothold, he'll move on to the others. Brigham might be your neighbor, but he's also potentially an ally. Victor Brigham has been trying to buy my land since the day of my father's funeral," Tessa said bitterly. "He's no ally." "There's a difference between business and survival," Quinn replied. "Brigham may want your land, but he doesn't want Blackwell to have it. That's something we can work with." As they drove the wagon back toward the Double D, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the landscape in gold and amber. Tessa found herself stealing glances at Quinn's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes. In just a few days, his presence had become something she relied on, something that made the endless work of the ranch feel less overwhelming. "Quinn," she began hesitantly, "that week you mentioned, it's almost up." His eyes remained on the road ahead, though she saw his hands tighten on the reins. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No," she admitted quietly. "I'm asking you to stay." Now he looked at her, surprise and something warmer in his gaze. "Even knowing what's coming, what Blackwell will do when he finds me. Even then," Tessa met his eyes steadily. "This isn't just about your protection anymore. I value your company." A slow smile spread across Quinn's face, transforming his features. "Well then, Miss Daniels, I believe we have an arrangement." The warmth that bloomed in Tessa's chest had nothing to do with the setting sun and everything to do with the man beside her. They were halfway back to the ranch when Quinn suddenly pulled the wagon to a stop, his posture alert. Tessa followed his gaze and spotted a plume of dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the direction of her ranch. Quinn handed her the reins and reached for his rifle. "Stay here." "Like hell," Tessa replied, grabbing her own weapon. "It's my ranch." A brief smile flashed across his face. "Stubborn woman," he muttered, but there was admiration in his tone. They moved the wagon off the trail into a stand of cottonwoods, using the trees for cover as the riders approached. Tessa counted 5 men, and her heart sank when she recognized the lead rider. "Brigham," she whispered to Quinn. "What's he doing on my land?" Victor Brigham was a large man in his 50s, with a florid face and the bearing of someone used to getting his way. He reined his horse to a stop near the main house, scanning the property with obvious interest. "Looks like he got my message," Quinn murmured, "earlier than I expected. What do we do?" "We greet him properly." Quinn lowered his rifle and stepped out from the trees, keeping his movement calm and deliberate. Tessa followed, her grip tight on her own weapon. Brigham spotted them immediately, his expression registering surprise before settling into a forced joviality. "Miss Daniels! Just the woman I was looking for." "This is a surprise, Mr. Brigham," Tessa replied coolly as they approached. "I don't recall inviting you onto my property." Brigham dismissed her comment with a wave of his hand. "Neighbors don't stand on ceremony, my dear, especially in times of trouble." His gaze shifted to Quinn. "And you must be the famous Quinn Zachary my boys told me about." "Word travels fast," Quinn observed. "Small communities," Brigham agreed, though his eyes were calculating. "Particularly when a former U.S. Marshal shows up in our quiet corner of Wyoming." Tessa glanced at Quinn, surprised that Brigham knew his background. "I make it my business to know who's operating in my territory," Brigham continued, addressing Tessa's unspoken question. "Just as I make it my business to know when the Blackwell Gang is circling a neighboring ranch." "Your concern is touching," Tessa said dryly, "considering you've been trying to absorb my ranch into your holdings for 2 years. Brigham had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Business is business, Miss Daniels. But this situation with Blackwell is something else entirely." He dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more comfortable." "It's been a long ride." Tessa hesitated, but Quinn gave her a subtle nod. "Fine," she conceded. "We can talk on the porch." As they walked toward the house, Tessa was acutely aware of the armed men following behind them. Quinn positioned himself slightly between her and Brigham's cowboys, his hand never far from his holster. Settled on the porch with cups of coffee, Brigham finally came to the point. "I understand Blackwell's men paid you a visit recently," he said to Tessa, "and that Mr. Zachary here sent them packing." "News does travel fast," Quinn commented. "Not fast enough, it seems," Brigham replied. "Blackwell's been buying up small spreads all across the territory, some willing sales, others less so. Those who resist tend to suffer unfortunate accidents." "Like fires?" Tessa asked. Thinking of Quinn's story about Willow Creek, Brigham nodded grimly. "Or stampedes, or mysterious shootings. The law can't or won't connect it all to Blackwell. He's careful." "Why are you telling us this?" Quinn asked directly. "Because Blackwell doesn't just want the Double D," Brigham said, leaning forward. "He wants a corridor from the mountains to the railroad. That means my land too, eventually. And the Henderson place. And the Wilson spread." "You're proposing an alliance," Quinn surmised. "I'm proposing survival," Brigham corrected. "Individually, we're vulnerable. Together, we might stand a chance." Tessa studied the older rancher skeptically. "Yesterday your men were mocking me in town. Now you want to be partners?" Brigham had the decency to look embarrassed. "Garth has a big mouth and small brains. I'll deal with him." He set down his coffee cup. "Look, Miss Daniels, I won't pretend I haven't had my eye on your land. It's good grazing with excellent water rights. But I'd rather have you as a neighbor than Blackwell any day." "What exactly are you suggesting?" Quinn asked. "Pooling our resources. My men, your expertise," Brigham nodded to Quinn, "and the other ranchers in the valley. Blackwell's strong, but he can't fight all of us if we stand together." Tessa exchanged a look with Quinn, seeing her own cautious hope reflected in his eyes. "We'd need more than just words, Mr. Brigham," she said firmly. "I need to know you won't abandon the Double D at the first sign of trouble." "Fair enough?" Brigham stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I'll send 5 of my best hands to help patrol your property. And I'll arrange a meeting with the other ranchers tomorrow night at my place." He extended his hand to Tessa. "Partners?" After a moment's hesitation, Tessa shook it. "Partners, for now." As Brigham and his men rode away, Tessa turned to Quinn. "Do you trust him?" Quinn watched the retreating riders thoughtfully. "I trust his self-interest, and right now, that aligns with ours." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's a start, Tessa. We need allies." She nodded, leaning slightly into his touch. "I just hope it's enough." The meeting at the Circle B the following evening brought together the major landowners of the valley, Brigham, Henderson, Wilson, and the Wilcox brothers, along with Tessa and Quinn. The atmosphere was tense at first, the men uncomfortable with a woman rancher in their midst. But Quinn's reputation and Brigham's endorsement gradually eased the awkwardness. "Blackwell's not just another rustler," Quinn explained, standing before the assembled ranchers in Brigham's dining room. He's building an empire, first by taking small homesteads, now moving on to established ranches. He's got 30 men, well-armed and ruthless. Why not get the law involved? Old Man Henderson asked, his weathered face creased with concern. Marshal Jenkins can barely mount his horse these days, Wilson scoffed, and the territorial governor's too busy courting statehood to worry about our problems. Besides, Quinn added, Blackwell has connections. Politicians, judges, people who look the other way. So what do you propose? Asked the elder Wilcox brother. Quinn laid out a map of the valley on the table. Blackwell's men are camped here. He indicated a spot in the foothills, about 20 miles from the Double D. His strategy is to isolate each ranch, cut off help from neighbors. We need to do the opposite, coordinate our defenses, establish regular patrols, and set up a warning system. As the men leaned over the map, discussing logistics, Tessa felt a swell of gratitude. A week ago, she had stood alone against Blackwell's threats. Now, because of Quinn, she had allies. The ranchers dispersed well after midnight, each committed to the alliance. Brigham offered to drive Tessa and Quinn back to the Double D, but Quinn declined, preferring to ride on their own terms. Under a canopy of stars, they made their way home, the night peaceful around them. Tessa found herself studying Quinn's profile in the moonlight. The strong lines of his face that had become so familiar to her in such a short time. "You're staring, Miss Daniels," Quinn said without looking at her, though a smile played at his lips. Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the darkness. "Just thinking. About. How much has changed since you arrived?" She guided her horse closer to his. "A week ago, I was alone against Blackwell. Now I have 5 ranchers ready to fight alongside me." "Alongside us," Quinn corrected gently. "Is that what we are now? An us?" The words slipped out before Tessa could stop them. Quinn reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. In the moonlight, his blue eyes were dark and serious. "I think you know that's not all we are, Tessa." Her heart quickened. "What are we then?" "Something I wasn't looking for," he admitted, his voice low. "Something I had no right to find, not with Blackwell still out there." "And yet, here we are," Tessa said softly. Quinn reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers. "Here we are." The touch of his fingers against hers sent warmth spiraling through Tessa's body. For a moment, they sat in silence, connected by that simple contact, the night air humming with possibility around them. Then Quinn gently released her hand. "We should get back. Dawn comes early." As they continued toward the ranch, Tessa felt something had fundamentally shifted between them, a door opened that could never fully close again. The next morning brought Brigham's promised men, 5 experienced cowhands who set about reinforcing the Double D's defenses. Quinn integrated them into a patrol schedule, positioning lookouts at key points around the property. "Your neighbor's men seem capable," Quinn observed as he and Tessa mended a fence in the south pasture. "Brigham may be ruthless in business, but he runs a tight operation," Tessa admitted. "These are his best hands." Quinn hammered a post into place with powerful strokes. "Good. We'll need them when—" He broke off, his head lifting as he scanned the horizon. Tessa followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. "What is it?" "Not sure." Quinn set down his hammer, hand moving to his revolver. "Stay here." He moved to his horse, retrieving a brass spyglass from his saddlebag. Extending it, he studied the distant hills, his expression growing grim. "Riders," he said finally, "at least a dozen, moving fast toward the Henderson place." Tessa's stomach dropped. "Blackwell? Has to be." Quinn collapsed the spyglass and vaulted onto his horse. "Get back to the house. Send 2 of Brigham's men to Henderson's and have the others prepare here." "What about you?" Tessa demanded, already mounting her own horse. "I'm going to try to cut them off, warn Henderson." Quinn's face was set in hard lines. "This is it, Tessa. Blackwell's making his move." Before she could protest, he spurred his horse, galloping toward the Henderson ranch. Tessa watched him go, fear and determination warring within her. Then she turned her horse toward home, riding hard to spread the alarm. By nightfall, the valley was in chaos. The Henderson ranch had been hit hard, 2 hands killed, the barn burned, and half the cattle scattered. Old Man Henderson himself was wounded but alive, evacuated to the Brigham Ranch for protection. Brigham's men had arrived in time to drive off the attackers, but not before significant damage was done. Quinn had joined the firefight, his experience evident in the precision of his counterattack. 3 of Blackwell's men wouldn't be returning to their boss. As darkness fell, the ranchers gathered once more at the Circle B to regroup. Quinn, his shirt stained with blood from a graze on his arm, stood grimly before them. "This was just the beginning," he warned. "Blackwell's testing our resolve, seeing how we respond." "Henderson almost lost everything," Wilson said, his face pale with shock. "What chance do any of us have?" "A better chance together than apart," Quinn replied firmly. "Henderson survived because we came to his aid. That's how we beat Blackwell, by standing as one." "The Double D will be next," Brigham predicted, glancing at Tessa. "It's the linchpin to Blackwell's plan." Tessa felt the weight of all eyes upon her. "Then we make our stand there," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Draw him into a fight of our choosing." Quinn studied her with a mixture of pride and concern. "It's risky." "It's necessary," Tessa countered. "We can't just wait for him to pick us off one by one." A slow smile spread across Quinn's face. Spoken like a true tactician, he turned to the assembled ranchers. "If we concentrate our forces at the Double D, we can set a trap, but we'll need every man you can spare." By the time Tessa and Quinn returned to her ranch, a plan was in motion. The neighboring ranchers would send their best men to reinforce the Double D, while keeping enough hands at their own properties to maintain a basic defense. Brigham offered to house the women and children from the smaller homesteads, creating a safe haven at his fortified ranch house. As they stood on Tessa's porch, the night deep around them, Quinn finally allowed himself to examine the wound on his arm. Tessa insisted on cleaning and bandaging it, her fingers gentle as they worked. "You could have been killed today," she said quietly, securing the bandage. "Occupational hazard," Quinn replied with a wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Is that all it is to you? An occupation?" Tessa's hand stilled on his arm. "Hunting Blackwell?" Quinn was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the darkness. "It was," he admitted finally. "For months, revenge was all I had, all I wanted. And now," Tessa prompted softly. His eyes found hers, the moonlight revealing a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "Now, I'm not so sure." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "You've complicated things, Tessa Daniels." "I seem to have a talent for that," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Quinn's free hand rose to her face, his fingers feathered light against her cheek. A talent among many. The moment stretched between them, fraught with unspoken words and possibilities. Then Quinn leaned forward, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with the urgency of people who understood how fragile tomorrow might be. When they finally parted, Tessa rested her forehead against his. "Promise me something." "Anything," Quinn murmured. "Promise me this isn't just about Blackwell anymore, that there's something after." Quinn drew back slightly, his eyes searching hers. "There was nothing after for me until I met you," he said honestly. Now I can see possibilities I couldn't before." It wasn't quite a promise, but Tessa understood the significance of his words. For a man who had lived solely for vengeance, even the acknowledgement of a future was profound. Dawn brought a flurry of activity as men from the neighboring ranches arrived at the Double D. Quinn organized them with military precision, positioning sharpshooters in the barn loft and establishing defensive positions around the ranch buildings. By midday, 20 determined men stood ready to defend the property. "Blackwell will come at dusk or dawn," Quinn predicted as he and Tessa inspected the preparations. "He favors the light advantage." "How many men will he bring?" Tessa asked, mentally counting their ammunition stores. "All of them. This is too important for half measures." Quinn's expression was grim. 25, maybe 30. Tessa did the math quickly. "So we're still outnumbered." "In quantity, yes, but we have better positions and motivation." Quinn squeezed her shoulder. "And we have surprise. Blackwell doesn't know about our alliance yet." As the afternoon waned, tension mounted across the ranch. Men checked and rechecked their weapons. Positions were adjusted, and final instructions given. Tessa moved among them, offering coffee and words of encouragement, her own nerves tightly controlled. Quinn found her in the kitchen. preparing sandwiches for the men. He stood in the doorway watching her for a moment before speaking. "You should go to Brigham's with the other women," he said quietly. Tessa didn't look up from her task. "No." "Tessa? This is my ranch, Quinn." Now she met his gaze, her green eyes fierce. "I won't hide while others fight my battles." He crossed the room to her, his hands gently gripping her shoulders. "It's not about hiding, it's about surviving." "And if you don't survive," she challenged, "if something happens to you because you're fighting for my land?" "This isn't just about your land anymore," Quinn said softly. "You know that." Tessa placed her hands against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. "Then you understand why I can't leave. This is about more than land for me, too." Quinn closed his eyes briefly, resignation and admiration warring on his face. "At least promise you'll stay in the house during the fighting." "I promise to be careful," Tessa countered, knowing it was the most she could honestly offer. A shout from outside interrupted them. "Riders coming! East Ridge!" Quinn was instantly alert, moving toward the door. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his revolver. Tessa grabbed her rifle from beside the door and followed him onto the porch. In the distance, a cloud of dust announced the approach of multiple riders. "Is it Blackwell?" she asked, her heart racing. Quinn shook his head, studying the approaching group through his spyglass. "No, it's Marshal Jenkins, and he's not alone." Indeed, as the riders drew closer, Tessa recognized the elderly marshal from Sweetwater at the head of the group. Behind him rode at least a dozen men, all wearing badges or carrying rifles. "What in the world?" she murmured. The men around the ranch emerged from their positions, equally confused by this unexpected development. Quinn walked out to meet the approaching lawman, his posture cautious but not hostile. Marshal Jenkins reined his horse to a stop, his weathered face breaking into a surprisingly youthful grin. "Zachary, thought I might find you here." His gaze shifted to Tessa. "Miss Daniels, apologies for arriving unannounced." "Marshal," Quinn acknowledged, his expression guarded. "This is quite a posse for a man who supposedly can't mount a horse anymore." Jenkins chuckled. "Rumors of my infirmity have been greatly exaggerated. Useful rumors, as it happens." He dismounted with surprising agility for his age. "Allow me to introduce Deputy Marshal Harrington from the Territorial Office, and these fine gentlemen from the newly formed Wyoming Rangers." The deputy, a stern-faced man in his 40s, tipped his hat to Tessa. "Madam, we understand you've been having trouble with the Blackwell Gang." Tessa exchanged a bewildered look with Quinn. "Yes, but how did you know?" "Because I told them," came a new voice as a rider separated from the group. It was Wilson, the neighboring rancher who had been at Brigham's meeting. "Rode through the night to Sweetwater after we left the Circle B. Figured we could use all the help we could get." Quinn's face registered surprise, then approval. "Smart thinking, Wilson." Marshal Jenkins adjusted his gun belt. "Blackwell's been a thorn in the territory's side for too long. The governor's finally authorized a special force to deal with him." He glanced around at the armed men positioned around the ranch. "Though it looks like you folks weren't waiting on official help." "We've learned to be self-reliant," Tessa said. Jenkins nodded approvingly. "Good Wyoming spirit. Now, suppose you fill us in on what we're facing." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the combined forces of ranchers and lawmen prepared for Blackwell's attack. With the additional manpower, Quinn revised their strategy, creating a more elaborate trap designed to surround the gang when they approached. "Blackwell's scouts will have seen the marshal's group arrive," Quinn explained as they finalized the plan. "He might delay his attack, or hit harder," Deputy Harrington suggested. "Blackwell's not known for backing down." "Either way, we'll be ready," Jenkins assured them. As twilight deepened into true darkness, the ranch grew quiet. Men took their positions, weapons ready, eyes straining against the night. Tessa, true to her promise, remained in the house, though she kept her rifle close and positioned herself near a window with a clear view of the approach. Quinn came to her before taking his position, his face half hidden in shadow. "Whatever happens tonight," he said softly, "know that meeting you changed everything for me." Tessa reached for his hand, holding it tightly in hers. "We're going to get through this, Quinn. Together." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Together?" he echoed. Then he was gone, moving silently into the darkness to take his place among the defenders. The hours crept by with excruciating slowness. Midnight came and went with no sign of Blackwell's gang. Tessa fought against fatigue, keeping her vigil at the window, the silver moonlight casting eerie shadows across the yard. It was the stillness that alerted her, first the sudden silence of night birds, the cessation of cricket song. Then came a soft whistle from one of the lookouts, a prearranged signal. They were coming. Tessa could make out movement along the ridge to the south, darker shapes against the dark sky, moving with stealth toward the ranch. She gripped her rifle tighter, her mouth dry with anticipation. The first shot came without warning, a flash of gunfire from the cottonwoods near the creek. One of Blackwell's men cried out, clutching his leg as he tumbled from his horse. And then hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from all sides as Blackwell's gang abandoned stealth for all-out assault. They charged the ranch buildings in a wave of horses and bullets, clearly expecting to overwhelm the defenders by sheer force. Instead, they rode straight into Quinn's trap. Crossfire from the barn and bunkhouse cut down the first riders. More fire came from concealed positions around the yard. The lawmen, positioned behind the corral, added their considerable firepower to the defense. Through her window, Tessa could see Quinn moving among the defenders, directing their fire with hand signals, occasionally firing his own weapon with deadly accuracy. His face was set in grim determination, illuminated in brief flashes by gunfire. The battle raged for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Blackwell's men, caught in the killing zone between defenders, began to fall back in disarray. Then Tessa saw him, a large man on a black horse, shouting orders, rallying his men for another push. Even at a distance, there was something commanding about his presence, something that marked him as the leader. Blackwell. He was directing a group of his men toward the house toward her. Tessa's grip tightened on her rifle. She had promised Quinn to stay inside, but she hadn't promised not to defend herself. The first man reached the porch, boot kicking in the front door. Tessa fired without hesitation, her bullet finding his shoulder. He staggered back with a howl of pain. A second man appeared in the doorway. Tessa worked the lever of her Winchester, chambering another round, but before she could fire, a shot rang out behind the intruder. He pitched forward onto the floor, revealing Quinn standing in the doorway, his smoking revolver in hand. "Are you all right?" he demanded, quickly scanning the room. "I'm fine," Tessa assured him, moving to his side. "Is it over?" "Not yet. Blackwell's trying to—" A bullet splintered the doorframe beside them. Quinn shoved Tessa behind him, returning fire at the shadowy figure on the porch. "We need to move," he said urgently. "The back door now." They retreated through the kitchen as more bullets tore through the front of the house. Outside, the firefight continued unabated, the night split with gunfire and shouts. As they reached the back door, it burst open. Tessa raised her rifle, but Quinn's hand pushed the barrel down. "It's Jenkins," he said with relief as the marshal stumbled in, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Blackwell's making for the barn," Jenkins reported grimly. "He's got 4 men with him. The rest are either down or running." Quinn's expression hardened. "He's after the horses. If he gets mounted again, he could escape." "Not if I can help it," Jenkins growled, checking his revolver. "Stay with Tessa," Quinn ordered. "I'm going after him." "Like hell," Tessa protested. "We do this together, remember?" Quinn looked as though he wanted to argue, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. "Stay behind me," he finally conceded. "Both of you." They slipped out the back door, keeping to the shadows as they made their way toward the barn. The main firefight had moved to the far side of the ranch yard, where the deputy marshal and his rangers were pressing the remaining gang members. The barn loomed ahead, its doors standing partially open. A lantern flickered inside, casting moving shadows across the yard. "Cover the back exit," Quinn whispered to Jenkins. "Don't let anyone through." The marshal nodded, moving silently around the side of the barn. Quinn turned to Tessa. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, her face resolute in the moonlight. "Ready?" They approached the barn doors cautiously, weapons raised. Inside, they could hear the nervous shuffling of horses and low voices, Blackwell giving orders to his remaining men. Quinn held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On the silent count, They moved into the barn, using the stalls for cover. "Blackwell!" Quinn called out, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "It's over. Your men are captured or dead. Surrender now." A harsh laugh came from the shadows near the back of the barn. "Quinn Zachary, the avenging marshal. I've been expecting you." "Then you know why I'm here," Quinn replied, his voice steady. "For Sarah and her family. For Willow Creek." "Ah, yes, your sister." Blackwell's voice was chillingly casual. "Unfortunate business, that. Nothing personal, you understand? Just progress." Tessa saw Quinn's jaw tighten, his knuckles white around his revolver. "There's nothing progressive about murder, Blackwell. Without vision, people perish, Marshal." Blackwell's voice moved slightly. He was edging toward the rear of the barn. "I have vision. I see what this territory could be, what it will be, once obstacles are removed." "The only obstacle to progress is men like you," Tessa called out, unable to contain herself any longer. There was a pause, then Blackwell chuckled. "The Daniels woman. I should have known you'd be here too." His voice hardened. "Your father was stubborn as well. Refused a very generous offer for this worthless patch of dirt." "My father understood what you never will," Tessa replied, her anger rising. "That some things aren't for sale." A sudden movement near the hayloft caught her eye. One of Blackwell's men positioning himself for a shot at Quinn. Without hesitation, Tessa fired, her bullet catching the man in the arm. He tumbled from the loft with a scream, landing heavily on a stack of hay bales. The distraction was all Blackwell needed. He made a break for the rear door, two men providing covering fire as he ran. "Blackwell's running!" Quinn shouted, returning fire at the men while moving to pursue their leader. As Blackwell reached the back door, a shot rang out. The outlaw staggered, clutching his side. Marshal Jenkins stepped into view, his revolver smoking. "Going somewhere?" the old lawman asked mildly. Blackwell snarled with rage, raising his own weapon. Quinn fired before he could pull the trigger, his bullet striking Blackwell in the shoulder. The outlaw leader fell to his knees, his gun clattering to the ground. "It's finished," Quinn said, approaching with his revolver trained on Blackwell's head. "Drop your weapons," he called to the remaining men, "or join your boss." Seeing their leader captured, Blackwell's remaining men surrendered, dropping their guns and raising their hands. As Deputy Harrington and his rangers secured the prisoners, Quinn stood over Blackwell, his expression unreadable. "Do it!" Blackwell hissed through clenched teeth, blood seeping between the fingers pressed to his wounded shoulder. "Finish what you started. Avenge your precious sister." Quinn's finger tightened on the trigger. For a long moment, the barn was silent, except for Blackwell's labored breathing. Then Tessa stepped forward, her hand gently touching Quinn's arm. "This isn't how it ends," she said softly. "Not for him, and not for you." Quinn's eyes met hers, conflict evident in their blue depths. "He deserves to die for what he did." "Yes," Tessa agreed simply. "But you deserve to live without his blood on your hands. Sarah wouldn't want this for you." At the mention of his sister's name, something shifted in Quinn's expression. The cold rage ebbed, replaced by a profound weariness. Slowly, he lowered his revolver. "Foreman Blackwell," he said formally, "you're under arrest for murder, theft, extortion, and about a dozen other charges that will see you hang legally." He holstered his weapon. "Take him away, deputy." As Harrington led the cursing Blackwell from the barn, Quinn remained motionless, his eyes closed, his breathing unsteady. Tessa moved closer, her hand finding his. "You did the right thing," she said. Quinn opened his eyes, gazing down at their joined hands. "Thanks to you." He looked around the barn, at the men being led away in handcuffs, at the signs of battle slowly fading into ordinary night. "It's really over." "Not everything," Tessa said, her voice soft but certain. "Some things are just beginning." The aftermath of the battle kept them busy until dawn. The wounded on both sides needed tending. The dead had to be respectfully covered and arrangements made for burial. Statements were taken, prisoners secured, and the scattered cattle rounded up. By the time the sun crested the eastern hills, Tessa was exhausted but strangely exhilarated. Her ranch was safe. Blackwell was captured. The neighboring ranchers were no longer adversaries but allies. And Quinn. She found him sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunrise, his face showing signs of the long night, but his eyes clearer than she'd ever seen them. "Marshal Jenkins is taking Blackwell and his men to Cheyenne tomorrow," she said, sitting beside him. "The territorial court will handle the trial." Quinn nodded. "Jenkins offered me my old job back, said the marshals could use a man with my experience." Tessa's heart constricted painfully. "Are you going to take it?" He turned to look at her, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "I told him I had other plans, more important ones." "Oh?" Tessa tried to keep her voice casual despite the hope blooming in her chest. "I've been hunting Blackwell for so long, I forgot there was anything else worth fighting for." Quinn took her hand in his touch gentle but sure. "You reminded me, Tessa. You showed me there's something after revenge." "And what's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Life, a future?" His fingers tightened around hers. "With you, if you'll have me." Tessa's breath caught. "Quinn Zachary, are you proposing to me on my own porch after the longest night of our lives?" A grin lit his tired face. "I believe I am, Miss Daniels, though I admit the timing could be better." "On the contrary," Tessa said, moving closer to him, "I think the timing is perfect." As the golden light of dawn spread across the Double D Ranch, Quinn drew Tessa into his arms. Their kiss was a promise of healing, of building, of a future neither had dared imagine just weeks before. "They came for the cattle, and for you," Quinn murmured against her lips. "But I meant what I said that first day they left empty-handed." "And you?" Tessa asked, her eyes searching his. "Will you leave empty-handed?" Quinn's answer was another kiss, deeper and more certain than the first. "Never," he promised. "I found everything I never knew I was looking for." In the weeks that followed, the valley slowly returned to normal, though it was a new normal, defined by cooperation rather than competition. The ranchers maintained their alliance, establishing regular patrols and mutual aid agreements. Marshal Jenkins kept his word, ensuring that Blackwell and his surviving men faced justice in Cheyenne. Quinn stayed on at the Double D, working alongside Tessa to rebuild what Blackwell's attack had damaged. The bullet holes in the barn were patched, the burned fencing replaced, and the scattered cattle recovered. Together, they created something stronger than what had existed before. Their wedding took place that autumn, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. The ceremony was held on the porch where Quinn had proposed, with Marshal Jenkins officiating and the neighboring ranchers in attendance. Even Victor Brigham made an appearance, presenting them with a fine pair of matched quarter horses as a wedding gift. "Never thought I'd see the day," Brigham muttered to Quinn during the celebration. "You transformed that stubborn woman." Quinn smiled, watching as Tessa laughed with the wives of the neighboring ranchers. "I didn't transform her, Brigham. She transformed me." As the seasons turned, the Double D prospered under their joint care. Quinn's experience as a lawman proved valuable in more ways than one, bringing organization and efficiency to the ranch operations. Tessa's determination and intimate knowledge of the land balanced his practicality with vision. When their first child was born, the following summer, a daughter with Tessa's copper hair and Quinn's blue eyes, they named her Sarah, honoring the sister whose memory had led Quinn to Tessa's door. "She would have loved you," Quinn told Tessa as they stood over their daughter's cradle. "Almost as much as I do." "I wish I could have known her," Tessa replied, leaning into his embrace. "You would have gotten along dangerously well." Quinn's arms tightened around her. "Two stubborn, brilliant women in my life." "Now you have three," Tessa said, smiling down at their sleeping daughter. 2 years later, a son joined their family, followed by another daughter the year after that. The Double D expanded as the railroad reached Sweetwater, bringing new opportunities and markets for their cattle. Quinn and Tessa added land, built a larger home, and established one of the most respected ranching operations in the territory. On the 10th anniversary of Blackwell's defeat, they hosted a gathering for the entire valley, a celebration of the peace and prosperity they had all fought to secure. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, and music played while couples danced under the stars. Quinn found Tessa watching their children play with the other ranchers' offspring, a contented smile on her face. The years had only enhanced her beauty, adding a quiet confidence that Quinn found more captivating than ever. "Happy?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Beyond words, she replied, taking his hand. You know, when you first rode onto this ranch, I thought you might be my downfall. Quinn chuckled, pulling her gently into his arms. And instead, you became my salvation. Tessa looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the lantern light. My partner, my love. Not bad for a revenge-obsessed former lawman, Quinn observed wryly. Not bad at all for a stubborn rancher's daughter, Tessa countered. As the music swelled around them, Quinn led Tessa into a dance, their movements as synchronized as their hearts. The ranch spread out around them, a testament to what they had built together from the ashes of violence and loss. They came for the cattle and for you, Quinn murmured, echoing the words he had spoken on that first day. But in the end, I was the one who found the real treasure. And I was the one who found home, Tessa replied, resting her head against his chest as they danced beneath the endless Wyoming sky, their love as vast and enduring as the land they had fought to protect.